My wife said, "If you don't trust me hanging out with my kid's real dad every weekend, then you leave." I replied, "You're absolutely right." Then I accepted the job transfer to Paris I'd been declining for her. When she texted, "What are you doing this weekend?" I sent a selfie from the airport. Let me tell you how a man who spent his entire life learning how to stay finally learned how to leave. My name is Killian Frederick. I am an architect by trade, which means I spend my professional life understanding load-bearing structures, knowing which walls hold everything up and which ones you can remove without the whole thing coming down. I'm good at my job. I am precise. I do not guess. I calculate, I measure, I account for every variable before I commit to anything. I did not apply that same discipline of love. That is the honest truth, and I am done being anything other than honest. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, the only child of Eleanor Frederick, a woman who raised me with the kind of quiet ferocity that only single mothers truly understand. My father left when I was 9. No dramatic goodbye, no tearful explanation. He was simply there on a Tuesday and gone by Thursday. I remember standing at the kitchen window that Friday morning, watching my mother make breakfast like the world hadn't just rearranged itself, and I made a promise to myself so deep and so silent that it took me 34 years to recognize it as a wound instead of a virtue. I told myself I would never be him. I would plant roots. I would be immovable. I would stay, no matter what. I would always stay. I wore that promise like a second skeleton. It held me upright. It also eventually held me hostage. I met Winter at a cookout in the summer. Mutual friends, someone's backyard, the kind of afternoon where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look golden and significant. She laughed at something across the yard, and I heard it before I saw her. And when I turned and saw her, I had the specific, irrational certainty that I had heard that laugh somewhere before, in a dream or a memory I couldn't locate. I introduced myself within 10 minutes. I was not typically that kind of man. She made me that kind of man immediately. On our third date, she told me about Beckett, her son, 4 years old. His father was a man named Derek Calloway, and she told me the story of that relationship the way you tell a story you've rehearsed, cleanly, with the emotional rough edges already sanded down. Derek had been charming and scattered, and finally just too young in the ways that matter. She had loved him. She had let him go. She had built herself back from the rubble of that, and here she was sitting across from me at a restaurant, being braver than she needed to be. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "That doesn't change anything," I told her. She looked at me like she was measuring me for something. "Most men say that," she said, "and then it changes everything." "I'm not most men," I said. I meant it completely. I just didn't understand, then, that meaning something completely and being right about it are two entirely different things. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. What I need you to understand about the years that followed is that I did not just marry Winter. I married the full architecture of her life, and I did it deliberately, with both eyes open, because that is how I do everything. I coached Beckett's t-ball team. I learned his nighttime routine, the specific sequence of events, the glass of water, the particular way he needed the hallway light left at exactly half, the 3-minute window after the light was set where he'd call out one last question just to confirm someone was still awake and nearby. I learned Derek's schedule so I could manage handoffs without manufacturing tension. I built stability the way I build structures. Carefully, load-bearing wall by load-bearing wall, nothing left to chance. Beckett started calling me Kai somewhere around his 5th birthday. Not Dad, Kentucky. And I understood that. The word dad was a big word for a little boy who still had a father in the picture, a father who was inconsistent and then less inconsistent, and then, over the years, quietly becoming something more reliable. I did not resent the name Kentucky. I loved it. I loved how he said it. Like the word itself was the full extent of something he trusted completely. Winter and I were good together. That is not revisionism. That is true. We had a real marriage with real warmth in it, with Sunday mornings and disagreements about thermostat settings and a shared running joke about her inability to correctly estimate how long anything would take. We were good, which is exactly why I need you to understand what the Laurent Beaumont offer meant when it arrived. It came on a Monday morning in October, A letter so specific and so deliberate in its language that I sat back in my office chair and stared at the ceiling for a full minute. Laurent Beaumont Architecture, Paris. Senior design lead. They wanted me specifically, not a me type, not someone with my skill set, but me by name, because of a structural philosophy paper I'd published in an industry journal 3 years earlier that their lead partner had kept on his desk. The salary was significant. The project was a large-scale, affordable housing initiative designed to prove that beauty and accessibility were not mutually exclusive. It was, structurally and philosophically, the exact project I had been building toward my entire career without ever having a name for it. I drove home with the letter folded in my jacket pocket like something contraband. Dinner was on the table. Lemon herb chicken. Beckett was doing homework at the kitchen island, his tongue pressed to his top lip the way it always was when he was concentrating. The scene was so perfectly complete that the letter in my pocket felt almost like a betrayal just for existing. I brought it up after Beckett was in bed. Winter read it once. Sat on the coffee table. Looked at me with something careful assembled in her expression. Paris, she said. How long? 2 years initially. Renewable. She reached over and took my hand. I think we built something here. I think Beckett needs stability. 2 years in Paris means every milestone happens without you. And I can't do that to him. Or to us. I looked at her hand covering mine. I nodded. I called the firm the next morning and politely declined. I did not let myself feel the weight of that for more than a day. That was the first mistake. They called again in March with better terms. I declined again. They called in June. My industry contact told me quietly, Killian, they don't do this. They don't keep calling. If you decline again, the offer dies. I went home, told Winter. This time she didn't reach for my hand. I thought we settled this. They came back with, Killian, I need you here. Beckett needs you here. Why do you keep entertaining this? I looked at her for a moment with something moving in my chest that I did not name out loud. Because it's a significant opportunity, Winter. You're allowed to prioritize your family. I declined again. In August, my contact sent a final message. The offer stood until end of year. After that, they'd move forward with someone else. I saved that email in a folder I kept closed and did not think about. I told myself that was what love looked like, closing a door and not looking at it. I was wrong. That was not love. That was a man slowly disappearing into his own silence, one closed door at a time, and calling it devotion. The shift with Derek happened so gradually that I keep trying to identify the exact moment, and I can't find it. That's the nature of gradual things. They deny you the clarity of a single turning point. What I can tell you is what I noticed because I'm a man who notices things. It is both my professional gift and my personal curse. Winter's voice dropped an octave when she said his name. That was the first thing. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone would catch unless they had spent years listening to the full register of her voice the way a musician listens to an instrument they know completely. Just slightly lower. Just slightly softer. The way your voice drops when you're talking about something that costs you something to say casually. Then she started defending him. Not defending him against specific accusations, because I hadn't made any. Defending him proactively, the way you defend something you've been thinking about privately and the defense arrives before the challenge does. He's really changed, Killian. He deserves credit. I agreed that he had. I said so. But the defenses kept coming anyway, unprompted, like she was rehearsing for a conversation she expected us to have. The Saturday pickups started running long. Winter would take Beckett to Derek's and come back 3 hours later with a specific lightness about her, like she'd set something down somewhere and hadn't picked it back up before she walked through our door. I noticed the lightness because I had spent years studying her weight, the way she carried a hard week, the way she moved when she was genuinely relaxed versus performatively fine. The woman who came home from those Saturdays was relaxed in a way she hadn't been with me in a while. I filed that observation in the same folder as the Paris email and tried not to look at it. I asked her, finally, on a Thursday evening. Not accusingly, just directly because I had never been able to do anything other than direct. Winter, are these weekend visits just about Beckett? She looked at me, and I saw something complicated move behind her eyes before she assembled the offense. Derek is Beckett's father. I'm not going to apologize for co-parenting. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you a question. Her jaw tightened with the particular precision of a woman who has decided what shape this conversation is going to take. If you don't trust me hanging out with Beckett's real dad every weekend, then you leave. The room went very quiet. I stood there and I felt, in that silence, the full weight of what she just handed me. She had not said I was wrong. She had not said nothing was happening. She had not reassured me or challenged me or offered me any version of the truth. She had handed me an ultimatum, as if my discomfort was the problem, as if my question was the offense, as if the correct response to concern from a man who had given 8 years of his life to her family was to give him the door and tell him to use it. And the language, I heard it in that moment as clearly as I've ever heard anything. Those were not her original words. Winter was many things, but she was not a woman who handed out ultimatums. Someone had given her that language. Someone had coached her toward it. I did not know who yet. I would understand later. I nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, I said. She blinked. That was not the answer she'd rehearsed for. She had written a story in her head where I argued, where I pushed back, where she had leverage. I watched her recalibrate in real time, watched her try to figure out where the scene was going now that I'd taken it somewhere else. I did not give her time to find the new footing. I walked to my office, opened my laptop, and opened a folder I had not looked at in months. The email was still there. The offer was still valid for 11 more days. I wrote 3 sentences. I said I'd like to accept. I said I could be ready in 3 weeks. I thanked them for their patience. I sent it before I could let the 9-year-old inside me talk me out of it. Then I closed the laptop, went to bed, and lay on my side of the mattress, staring at the ceiling until 4 in the morning, mourning the version of my life I had been so absolutely certain of. 3 weeks is enough time to pack a life into boxes when you approach it the same way you approach everything, methodically, without performance, one decision at a time. I was not cold about it. I was not punishing anyone. I was simply a man doing the only honest thing left to do, which was take a woman at her word when she told him to go. The hardest part was Beckett. I knelt down in front of him on Thursday afternoon, and I looked at him, this boy who had grown from a 4-year-old who couldn't say my full name into an 8-year-old who rinsed his own cereal bowl because I had taught him that, who shook hands firmly because I had taught him that, who apologized when he was wrong because I had taught him that. And I put both hands on his shoulders. I love you, Beckett. That doesn't change. No matter what, no matter where. You understand? He nodded with the solemn seriousness of a boy who understood more than he was letting on. I kissed his forehead. I stood up. I left. I did not let myself look back through the window, because I knew exactly what I would do if I looked back through the window, and I had finally stopped building my life around what other people needed for my weakness. Winter did not believe I was actually going until the house went quiet. I know this because she told me, months later, that she sat on the couch after my car disappeared and waited for my headlights to come back up the driveway. She waited for an hour. She told herself I would call from the highway. Then from the hotel I booked for my last 3 nights. Then from the airport. I didn't call. I did not call because she had told me to leave, and I had too much respect for both of us to pretend she hadn't. When she texted on that first Saturday, "What are you doing this weekend?" I was standing in Charles de Gaulle with my carry-on at my side, jet-lagged and disoriented and more awake than I'd felt in years. I took the selfie without thinking too hard about it. Just me. The departure board just over my left shoulder. A small, tired, real smile. I sent it without a caption. No anger. No explanation. No speech. Just proof. I took you at your word. Here is where your word put me. She stared at that photo long enough that her coffee went cold. I found that out later, too. Laurent Beaumont received me with a warmth I had not anticipated. My colleagues were serious, opinionated people who argued about cantilevers and load distribution over dinner and meant every word of it. They didn't know about Winter or Beckett or Derek. To them, I was simply Killian Frederick, the American whose structural instincts were, in the words of the lead partner, almost aggressively honest. I liked that more than I could explain. I started running every morning along the Seine before the city woke up, The light doing impossible things to the water in the early hours, and I noticed after about 3 weeks that I was sleeping completely. Full nights, deep and uninterrupted, and only when the sleep started coming reliably did I understand how badly I had been sleeping before. Not just recently. For years, I had been sleeping like a man, perpetually listening for something, some sound in the house that would require him to respond. Paris taught me that I had been on call inside my own marriage in ways I had never named. Back home, 3 days after I left, Beckett asked his mother at breakfast whether he was the reason I'd gone. Winter told me about this conversation months after it happened, and when she told me her voice had a quality I'd never heard in it before, something past guilt, something that had already been processed and was being told to me now as testimony rather than confession. Beckett had said, "He came to every single one of my games, even the ones where I struck out. Dad came to 2. I know Dad is trying, but Kai came to every single one. And then he had gotten up, rinsed his bowl the way I taught him, and at the door he'd stopped and said, 'I hope you didn't tell him to leave, Mom. I hope it was something else.' He was 8 years old. He understood the load-bearing walls better than anyone." That same evening, Beckett had gone to his room and texted me from the basic phone I'd bought him for his birthday, the one with exactly 3 contacts saved in it. "Mom, Kai emergency." He typed, "Did you have to go? Or did you want to go?" In Paris, it was past midnight, and I was sitting by the window of my temporary apartment, unable to sleep, looking at a city I had always wanted to see under different circumstances. I called him. He answered whispering. We talked for 11 minutes. I told him that having to go and wanting to go weren't always different things. He said he didn't understand that. I said that was okay. I hadn't either at his age. He asked if I was coming back. I told him I didn't know yet. He said he still had my number saved. I told him to keep it there. That 11-minute phone call cost me more sleep than anything else in those first months, but it also gave me something I can only describe as clarity. The knowledge that whatever happened next, whatever version of this story found its ending, that boy knew he was loved by me completely, and that no geography could undo what I had actually built with him. Winter texted periodically. I replied with the careful neutrality of a man being honest about where he stood, not coldly, because I have never been able to do cold, but with a precision that said exactly what it said and nothing more. She asked if Paris was good. I said it was. She asked if I missed home. I said I missed Beckett, and I was figuring out the rest. She asked if we could talk. I said not yet. That one sat unanswered for 3 days before she came back with, "What does not yet mean?" I thought about it for a long time. Then I wrote, "It means I'm learning who I am when I'm not making myself smaller to fit into someone else's comfort. Well, I've finished figuring that out. We can talk." She didn't reply for a week. My mother called on a Sunday. Eleanor Frederick, who had learned to read the real conversation underneath the one being had, worked through the small talk with her usual surgical patience, and then said, "She called me, you know." I asked what Winter had said. She said she made a mistake. She said she didn't understand what she had. I asked my mother what she'd said back. I asked her what she was going to do about it. She didn't have an answer yet. We were quiet for a moment. Then my mother said something that I have thought about every day since. She said, "Your father would have stayed too long. You're nothing like him." I had spent 25 years afraid of being him. I had bent and shrunk and made myself immovable in all the wrong ways, trying not to become a man who leaves. And my mother, who had watched me do all of it from the closest possible distance, was telling me that the leaving had been the proof. That choosing yourself, finally, after everything, that was the difference. I stood at my apartment window and looked at Paris and felt something in my chest unknot that I hadn't known was knotted. 3 months after the airport selfie, on a Sunday morning, Winter sat on the porch of the house we'd shared and watched Derek Calloway pull into the driveway to pick up Beckett. He was exactly on time. He walked up the path, and she watched him and felt, with the quiet devastation of perfect clarity, absolutely nothing romantic. Not nothing cold, just nothing. The story she had been rewriting. The one where Derek's transformation was a second chance at first love. She saw it for what it had always been. Not love, familiarity. The comfort of the known dressed up as something deeper. She had confused Killian's steadiness for ordinary and Derek's history for depth. She'd had it completely backwards, And she understood that now the way you understand things that cost you everything to learn, fully, irreversibly, too late to be painless. She watched Beckett run out and hug his father, and she smiled because the love between them was real, and she had never wanted anything else for her son. Derek looked up at her over Beckett's head and smiled, and she smiled back with the specific smile of a woman who has finally stepped outside the story she was living in and can see its shape clearly from the outside. After they drove away, she sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where her 8-year-old son had told her the truth about T-ball attendance with a clarity she had not been able to match, and she opened her laptop. She wrote slowly. She said she owed me a real conversation, not a negotiation, not an argument. She said she understood now what she hadn't understood then, and what she hadn't understood was me. She said she understood if I wasn't ready. She understood if I was never ready. She hit send. In Paris, I was just finishing a morning run along the Seine. The early light was doing what it always does at that hour, coming off the water in long gold ribbons, the city still quiet enough to hear itself breathe. My phone buzzed as I stopped to catch my breath, and I read the message standing on a riverside. And I stood there long enough that a man walking his dog glanced at me with the particular curiosity of someone watching a person receive news that is rearranging them in real time. I put the phone in my pocket. I started walking. I did not have an answer yet. The man Paris had been building, unhurried, clear-eyed, finally standing at his full height, was still under construction, and I had learned enough about structures to know you do not rush the load-bearing work. Maybe I would find my way back to her. Maybe Beckett would grow up with all 3 numbers still in his phone. Maybe this was the end of one story and the first clean page of something entirely else. I did not know. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of not knowing. I had spent 34 years being the man who stays because leaving felt like becoming my father. What I know now is that my father left without being asked. He left without a word. He left because he was afraid of what staying would cost him. I left because she asked me to, and because I finally loved myself enough to listen. That is not the same thing. That will never be the same thing. Some walls are load-bearing. Some walls, when you remove them, let in light. The work is knowing which is which. I am an architect. I should have known that all along. Paris reminded me. The light said so every single morning, coming off the water like it had somewhere important to be.